Hi guys. My son graduated high school yesterday, so I've been looking through a lot of his pictures all the way through when he's growing up. Let me show you a few. Can you put these pictures in order from when he was youngest to when he was older? We're looking at patterns. Today we're going to look at patterns on how things grow and develop. Not just one person, but all living things. Let's start with Adam. Can we see which one was the picture of when he was the youngest? Can you touch that picture? That's right, that's a baby picture. We recognize babies for certain patterns and traits that they have. Can you put the rest of the pictures in order from youngest to oldest? I'll give you some time. Did you do it? Looking at one person is actually not too hard because we can see a pattern as they grow older. But what about other living things? Do other living things follow the same pattern? Go ahead and grab the worksheet that goes along with this video, and I'll come back and we can get started. You did a great job figuring out how my son has grown over time. Does that same pattern happen with all living things? Does the same pattern happen with this rose bush behind me? Or the flies and bees that pollinate the rose bush? Does that same pattern work with all living things? Let's take a look at some more humans and see if we can see the pattern with all humans first. On your worksheet, you'll see that there's a set of like 5 or 6 pictures, all of different people in different stages of their life. Can you put them in order from youngest to oldest, looking at the patterns that happen as people age? Go ahead and pause this video, and when you're done with that, start us back up and we'll move on to something else. It's pretty easy looking at patterns in human beings. We're all used to seeing human beings. We have babies that grow into toddlers. We have toddlers that grow into children, which grow into adolescents, and then young adults, and then we get more of the veteran old people. That's a pattern that happens in human beings. The same pattern doesn't always happen with other animals, and especially plants. I have a bunch of vocabulary words here on our worksheet. Can you pick out which of those words happen with all living things? What are things that all living things have in common? Some of those words you might not know, like metamorphosis. If that's the case, go ahead and look it up, or ask somebody that might know the answer. When you're done, start the video again, and we'll move on to looking at very specific lifestyles in some living things. Did you figure out which words all living things have in common? Well, I started to look at them, and I think I came up with a few. I think if you're a living thing, you need to be born. So birth is probably something that all living things have in common. If you're a human, you were born as a baby. If you were a dog, you were born as a puppy. If you were a rose bush, you were born as a seed. And a tree, you were born as a seed. But everything had to be born. Next in the pattern, I think that all living things need to grow. We take in nutrients from the environment, whether that be food that we eat as a human, or a puppy, or a duckling, or if you're a plant, you take in sunlight and water, and that makes you grow into a tree and a rose bush. Next, I think all living things are going to need to make new living things. We call this reproducing. Humans make babies, dogs make puppies, ducks make ducklings, trees make seeds, rose bushes make seeds. All of these things are a way in which we reproduce and make more living things. Finally, all living things do eventually die. This is the end of the pattern. So the pattern starts with birth, growth, reproducing, and then eventually dying. We call this pattern a life cycle. And you guys are extremely familiar with the human life cycle and all of the stages that go into it. But different animals, different plants, have different life cycles. So we're going to look at very specific animals and plants and see if we can't figure out their life cycles. I have a list on your worksheet of maybe 10 or 11 different living things. We're going to do some research in order to figure out these living things' life cycle. I've actually helped start your research by giving you an example of a video you could watch and an article you can read about each of these living things. As you do your research, I want you to think about a couple of things. I want you to come up with 2 really cool, interesting facts about your living thing. What sticks out for you in the article or the video that you saw? Then, I want you to make a model of their life cycle. Now, a model is really just a drawing with some labels and arrows that show how things are moving through the cycle. You'll probably find some examples of this in your research. So make a drawing of your animal's life cycle. And finally, one thing that scientists always do is we ask more questions. What other questions do you have about your animal that you'd like to investigate further? Put this stuff on your worksheet, and when you're done, you can start this video again and we'll finish up. Alright, so now we've learned about all kinds of different life cycles. You've gotten really deep into your animal, learning all about its life cycle. Hopefully you had a lot of fun doing your research. Scientists do a lot of research in order to figure things out in the world around them. So now that we've seen what a living thing is, let's take a look at some exceptions. We know that if you're a living thing, you have to have this pattern of your life cycle. There needs to be birth. It needs to grow by taking in nutrients. It needs to reproduce, and then eventually it will end the pattern by dying. What about some other things around us that have a lot of those characteristics? I'm thinking about fire, and this one bothers me a little bit, because fire is born in a spark. Fire does take in nutrients and grows as it burns things. Fire does reproduce and make new fires, and once it's out of stuff to burn, the fire does eventually die. But I don't think anyone would consider fire a living thing. There's some other things that living things have that fire doesn't. But we're going to save that for when you're older. What about a mule? Do you guys know what a mule is? A mule is actually when a daddy horse and a mommy donkey have a baby. That makes a mule. But what's special about mules is that mules can't have babies. Mules are what we call sterile. If mules can't reproduce, does that mean they're not alive? I don't think anyone would say that a mule isn't alive. It's basically everything else that a living thing is. It's one of those exceptions to the rules. Let's talk about another exception and see if we consider this alive or not. I want to introduce you to Sophie. In the video that you can watch at the bottom of your worksheet, I want you to think about, is Sophie alive? What are those things that make Sophie seem like she's alive? And what are those things that make Sophie not alive? Take some time to watch this video and answer those questions. And I'll see you next time.